in Cornell, for example, the number of Black student admissions dropped half. You have students from like the National Society of Black Engineers saying that recruitment numbers are dwindling at rates that they've never seen before.
Every argument that I'm hearing kind of revolves around not having opportunities, not having money, not having, the resources to pay for a bunch of different things.
It's not just not having, it's denied. Even when you want to get it, it's denied.
Step forward if you agree with the prompt. An Ivy League education is worth the tuition.
So I think that an Ivy League education is worth the tuition if you put in the work and you take advantage of the opportunities at the school. It's worth the tuition if you use everything at your disposal at the school. If you go to the school but don't take advantage of what you're given, then obviously not, but you're given so much that I think it is worth it.
No, absolutely. I think the resources that come from a well-renowned university that has over 100-something years and if not more of experience and research behind it. I know for me, I am very fortunate to have classes taught by former Congress members or Pulitzer-winning journalists, and it's truly a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for me to gain enrichment from that. That being said, I totally agree with you. It's not the institution that makes the person, but rather the person that makes the institution, taking advantage of the resources and putting their best foot forward.
You could go to an Ivy League school and then not take advantage of anything, and then not succeed. But if you are given so many opportunities at an Ivy League school, I think it's definitely worth it.
Yeah, I think also just I think the other thing that I experienced when I was going through an Ivy League is I was able to really be exposed to a lot of people from different backgrounds that I would not have normally been exposed to. So I grew up in a really rural, suburban part of upstate New York, and so we didn't have students who went to Ivy Leagues that often. And so personally, being able to meet people that were from vastly different backgrounds was really eye-opening. I think the other thing that I think about a lot in terms of is it worth it or not is tuition in particular. A lot of my friends actually were FGLI, and so I think there's actually a lot of generous financial aid in particular that also kind of helps support that section.
1,000%. I think the biggest issue with the Ivy Leagues is that there's such a high ticket price to entry, and by nature of being at one, I think is a testament to privilege.
Again, as you said, Ivy League schools do give a lot of aid. So if someone can't afford it, I feel like they're usually able to get help. But in my opinion, if you're able to make it work, if you're able to afford it, I definitely think you should take advantage of that as opposed to another school. I do think it's worth the tuition. Obviously, if you really can't afford it, that's a different story. But I do think you should take advantage of trying to pay that tuition to go to that school.
Can the disagreeer step forward?
I'm from Hong Kong, so I have an international perspective. A lot of my friends went to many different international universities. That's much, much cheaper. For example, I have friends in Oxford, Cambridge. Tuition is much cheaper. Some of my friends went to German university or Norwegian university. You don't have to pay for that. So honestly, there's a lot of world-class university in the world. So you don't have to pay that much for an Ivy League, I think.
Well, also, for me, it wasn't an option for me to go to Europe and study abroad in Europe. From New York, all my family's in New York. It wasn't really feasible for me to go study in Europe, but I do understand what you're saying, that Oxford is definitely a world-renowned institution, probably very, very similar opportunities, going to Columbia, Yale, Cornell. So I do agree with that, but just for a lot of people, for me, I wasn't able to go study abroad in Europe for all 4 years of college.
Right? It's a different process, I think, with applications for American applicants, and if you haven't been planning for it from early stages of your high school, college application process, I think you're at a pretty big disadvantage. But I would love to hear more of what you guys have to say.
I think the reason I disagree is because ultimately it depends. I think a lot of people treat these elite institutions, especially when they're blindsided by the validation they receive from it, they treat it more this like manual that they're following because they have to versus a tool that people can use to advance themselves in their own path. So I feel like it really depends on the person. I think there are a lot of people who are currently probably studying at these schools who realistically they're probably not using that tuition like efficiently.
So you agree that's worth the tuition if you put in the work to take advantage of the opportunities that you're provided?
Yeah, I think if the work that you're putting in, or like if the path that you're on and the work you're putting toward that path aligns with, I guess, the opportunities that an elite institution offers, I think.
I think, like you guys said earlier, I think the network is very valuable. I don't think you need to spend 4 years and pay full tuition to get that network. I have friends who dropped out after 1 semester and still keep in contact with people from school. They'll always have Harvard on their resume. I left Harvard to pursue an opportunity at a startup. That's just not something I really had the resources to do while in school. It's also not a path you necessarily need a degree for. So I just didn't think that the tuition was really worth it.
I think it kind of breaks down to, if you think about Ivy League education in particular, if you compare it to other schools, and you just look at the raw numbers of what graduates from other top state schools are doing, which are charging significantly lower, then the thing you will find is that they're still getting high paid jobs, they're still doing amazing things with their career, and they're not paying as much as Ivy League students are. And the best way to think about it is that in the last 20, 30 years, tuition has gone up like crazy. But at the same time, all of these colleges manage like billion-dollar endowments that make tons of revenue. Every year is a surplus, and that gets invested in hiring more administrators and constantly adding more administrative bloat and more luxuries that colleges don't really need, instead of bringing down the tuition costs. And I thought the international point was a great example. Why are other countries able to offer great education at much lower prices with students getting really good outcomes? So what is it really that we are paying for?
Sorry, I wanted to push back against kind of the first part of what you said about like high-paying jobs. I don't think high-paying jobs is necessarily like the sole goal that guides a lot of students through an Ivy League career. It's certainly a great benefit, of course. But no, I think if the end goal is to get a high-paying job, get a high ROI on your degree, then any school is something that you can do that with. But Ivy Leagues offer, like we mentioned, like the social capital, but also like world-class professors who can not only give you their conventional wisdom for like the classes that you need to hit baseline, but also the wisdom that they've accumulated from over the years. And when your goal is to be a lifelong learner, I think that is invaluable.
And also, like a high number of CEOs, world politicians, all went to Ivy League schools, continue, and then go back, teach there, or people that work for them teach there. I don't know if I would get that opportunity to have a professor like that if I went to like a state school in New York.
No, absolutely, that makes sense. But the thing that I'm pushing back on is that yes, a lot of successful people are from Ivy League schools, but is that because they were smart people who were selected by Ivy League colleges because they were smart and because they went there for the signal? Or is it really something different in their education that did that? Because if you're telling me that it is purely the quality of the faculty that is making you better and more successful in your career, not in terms of money, just in terms of like anything you want to achieve, can you honestly tell me that it is the professors that are making the difference? Or is it the fact that you're already a competent person and Ivy League schools are obviously great at selecting these smart people, and that's why they have a high correlation? Like, is it correlation or is it causation?
I see what you're saying, but I think both of those things can ring true at the same time. And if anything, having the signaler of an Ivy League facilitates that process. Say you're a driven person and an Ivy League opens so many doors for you. I come from, a smaller town. I'm from Las Vegas originally. A lot of folks from my school, we only had, I think, I can name maybe like 4, 5-ish people in my entire graduating class around the valley that got into Ivy Leagues. It's really common to stay in state and to stay at home, and nothing wrong with that, of course. But when you want to venture out and get as much as an advantage as you can, an Ivy League opens that door. There are so many opportunities that I had in terms of like internships and pursuing who I want to be that I wouldn't have been able to get had I remained at my state school.
I also want to add, so Columbia has an undergraduate school called the School of General Studies, And a lot of people that go there are people that went to community college for 2 years, served in the army, a lot of non-traditional paths before they went, so they didn't go to necessarily do the top, were necessarily the top of their class in high school, but they got into the Columbia School of General Studies and pursued an undergraduate degree there and ended up taking advantage of those opportunities and doing very well. In fact, I'm a student in general studies. The only reason that I'm a non-traditional student, so I'm pursuing a dual degree, so I'm getting 1 degree from the Jewish Theological Seminary in Jewish Studies, and then I get 1 degree from Columbia University. So I take 3 classes at each institution each semester. But if, let's say, that the Jewish Studies program was with another school, like a state school, I definitely would not have pursued that. The only reason that I even considered applying is because it was a dual degree program with Columbia University.
Ironic that you would not pursue the Jewish Studies program at Columbia, where there is an active anti-Semitism thing going on, but not at state school. Like, I'm trying to understand, why would you not pursue it at a state school?
Me and my friends, we didn't feel particularly comfortable at Columbia last April being Jewish students on campus. But I don't think that's a reason to not go to the school. And there are state schools that did indeed have the anti-Semitism problem.
I'm going to return back to a point you made and actually like kind of disagree with this side, but also agree with that side, but also kind of qualify it with this side. You said that, I know that you guys mentioned there's a lot of like world-renowned professors in Ivy League, and I totally agree. Like one of my favorite professors was like a Pulitzer Prize winning professor, and like who did like creative writing, amazing professor and person overall. That being said, a lot of people who go to Ivy Leagues who do like this really world-renowned research are not like the best teachers, and that is something I also have noticed. And so I'm gonna like kind of qualify my answer. So I graduated from Yale with a double degree in computer science and East Asian studies. And so I think in terms of like the computer science and like a more like, I'm curious what economics is like if you guys majored in that, but those tend to be like bigger like lecture classes in particular. And honestly, I think that getting a degree at like, you know, an Ivy League for like computer science versus like a local state school is not really that much of a difference. Now, where I do see a big difference is in like the humanities classes, because one thing I noticed at Yale were the classes in the humanities were so tiny. They were like 4 to 5 to 6 people, and then you really get the effect of like the professor, like your peers in particular. That's when I really started to see, like feel my worldview opening and having these really intellectual discussions. I know in my state school, because like there's so many more students in particular, like it's a lot harder to get that kind of tiny class size, and that's more of an institutional thing, less of the professor side.
And I think on the point about like specifics too, I wouldn't be able to pursue the major that I'd be pursuing. I'm an industrial and labor relations major. My 2 minors are super niche, inequality studies and law and society. Cornell's big thing is any person, any study. So, you know, we have super duper niche minors like that. And I don't think there's other schools that have the resources to back like an entire college to create this program about industrial and labor relations.
Thinking about the future can be overwhelming. Back when I was in school, I was constantly anxious about what life would look like for me in the real world, and it didn't get any easier once I actually stepped into the real world. That is, of course, until I started talking through these thoughts with a therapist, which is why we want to thank BetterHelp, the sponsor of today's video. Talking to a therapist has been helpful in unpacking a ton of anxious thoughts. BetterHelp makes it easier to get started with a therapist. They're a platform where you can connect with a therapist from their diverse network of 30,000 plus licensed professionals with a wide range of specialties and backgrounds. To get started, go to betterhelp.com/jubileemedia to fill out a questionnaire, and you will match with a therapist in as little as a couple days. They carefully make sure therapists on the platform are well qualified, and their customer support team is there to help you if you have any questions. Start fresh any day of the year with BetterHelp. Click the link in the description or go to betterhelp.com/jubileemedia and get 10% off your first month of therapy. Thanks to BetterHelp for supporting this channel. Now let's get back to the video.
Ivy League students are more successful than Ivy League dropouts.
I think we hear a lot about extremes on both ends when it comes to dropout stories. So you hear like the, I don't know the best way to put it, but like losers, or they have like the Bill Gates, like Mark Zuckerberg stories. And I feel like that's, and I feel like on the other end with Ivy League graduates, I would say on average, I think people probably are generally more successful, but it is hard for me to gauge. I was unsure whether it would come up because I feel like there isn't a wide range of stories when it comes to Ivy League dropouts.
I think like what he says, correlation or causation. Like the people that are Ivy League students are generally like more driven, hardworking, with a lot of money backing them. So
Right.
obviously they're gonna have easier time getting success. But I don't think it's because of the Ivy League that causes it. It's because inherently they already like have those qualities to be a successful candidate.
I think if I think about the actual numbers, I don't know what the actual numbers are, but I would assume that the rate of having I guess a good, nice life where you're doing something you love and you have a full-time job and you make good money is probably higher on the graduate side of things because you are graduating and it does provide some kind of a net that helps you.
Right.
The thing I struggle with is that on the dropout side, of course, there's a whole segment of people who are kind of more involuntarily dropping out. Like they're dropping out because they're not able to keep up with grades and they're not able to keep up with classes, which is a whole different thing. But even on the side of people who are dropping out because of, because they want to pursue something else, you're kind of taking a risk. And does that yield to more chances of failure sometimes? Absolutely. But that is the good thing about this country. Like I moved here from India mostly because I saw that people in the US are much less risk averse. Like they are willing to take risks, they are willing to make big, bold bets, which is why they're also building good technology and they're doing amazing things.
I like how you brought up how some people drop out because of involuntary things, and that might make them not successful. Like I guess I'm one of the case. I didn't drop out to pursue like whatever like startup I had. I didn't have any startup. I dropped out due to health reasons, and I guess I would say I'm not that successful as compared to my peers.
Ultimately, there is a lot of comfort or just a lot of comfort that comes with getting your degree from an Ivy League school. And I guess on the other end of it, there are extremes. And I think it was harder for me to drop out, I think, than it was to graduate. But I know if I would have graduated, I would have maybe had like a certain level of material success. But when you measure success by things like personal fulfillment, like mental health, things like that, I don't think I would have been happier that way.
All right. Can the disagreeer step forward?
Off the bat, I just want to say, like, you literally took the words right out of my mouth. I didn't step up because I, plain and simple, don't believe that there is one standard definition of what success is.
Yeah, I agree
and I
with
think
that.
that it's deeply subjective and personal and not always gauged by material wealth.
Yeah.
Like, I think for me, I know that I've succeeded if I'm able to make an impact, if I'm able to use my skills to change someone's life or positively like influence policy to protect marginalized communities.
I also think that if someone dropped out, they were still at an Ivy League school for however long they were there. They still got into the Ivy League school. So I think they will still be somewhat successful in what they're doing. In fact, they could even be more successful. A lot of people, as we talked about, dropped out to pursue jobs and startups like you. I don't necessarily think dropping out of an Ivy League school. A lot of people have a reason for dropping out, maybe because they were going to be more successful before they finished graduating.
If you think of dropout stories, you just think of Zuckerberg or Gates, but there are other stories out there that just don't get voiced. And I think no matter what path you choose, whether you're graduating or dropping out, like you said, like you did get into an Ivy League school, there's probably some positive trajectory for success in your life. And I don't really think one or the other is better.
Yeah, I think that, like, for example, one thing I was going through a lot when I was in my senior year was like, do I go to, because I saw all my peers going to like management consulting, in particular with like BCG and like I didn't even know management consulting existed until I came to college. I was like, what does this like acronym mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was like, what's the hype? But then you start to see all of your peers just kind of like pursue it, and you start to feel this pressure. And like, I didn't even know why like people were into it, but then I think it really. I actually took a gap year before I graduated, so I can relate to a lot of the like thoughts about due to mental health reasons as well. And so for me personally, like I realized that my definition of success is not going down that path or not going down like the really like I had a lot of computer science. I was in the computer science department. A lot of them went to like these big tech companies, Facebook, Apple, or sorry, Meta, and all those ones. And I felt this huge pressure to get this really high-paying job. That I realized was making me unhappy. And I'd done some of these internships before. It was not for me. And so I realized that like I really love education and teaching kids and writing and so forth. And so for me, like my definition of success did not correlate with that. And I don't think like an Ivy League is really needed in that sense.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that because the pressure of choosing a conventional path is so overwhelming at prestigious institutions because you've always done the best thing, you know, like you were at the top of your high school class, then you got into one of the best universities, and now it's like, how do I not go to one of the best companies? Like that, it's kind of this pressure that builds up in a lot of people, and there's already like consulting clubs that people are joining in the first year of school, or they're doing like these internships that like, you know, specifically trying to get into a company or something like that. And they're doing these like career paths on day 0. And there are people who are planning their MBAs like 6, 7, 8 years from now. And they're taking a job in banking because they want to work at a PE company 2 years later, and they've already taken an offer. And it's bizarre to me. Why would you not take a bold bet? It's an amazing country. There's amazing resources. There's a decently good social security net. And the unemployment rate is very low. It's like 3 or 4% or something in the US. So at the end of the day, if you don't get anything, you have a bunch of opportunities of jobs you can still get. Why not take a bold bet? Like, why not take a risk and do something interesting?
I wanted to kind of dig into what you said at the beginning too, because I think you might have opened a little bit of can of worms about like corporate and like internships based on the nods that I was kind of sensing from the group. But I think that like that pressure is absolutely like so real. I think the competitiveness to get into some of these clubs that are harder to get into than the Ivy League itself, and the fact that like all of your friends are either going to law school, consulting, or grad school, and that makes someone who like, you know, might want to take a gap year or, you know, like stay at home for 6 months after they grad really just feel like out of place. I know for me, I didn't want to pursue corporate America. I did one internship. I didn't really like it. But all of my friends and everyone within sight was like, oh, I'm recruiting for BCG right now. Did we case for McKinsey already? I didn't even know what most of these companies were until I got to Cornell.
I think success is like a lot of what other people think of you, and most people know Apple, Meta, finance. So a lot of people just go down those routes because that's what they think success is, but I think success is sort of something you have to find yourself.
Yeah.
I also think the word dropout is sort of stigmatized.
It's charged.
I am disappointed in the elimination of DEI initiatives.
I think just because of the history of these institutions and how they started, like ultimately having something in place to try and like mitigate the like culture of those places and the kinds of people that are accepted and the kind of people that continue to be accepted is a good thing. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think of people of different ethnicities and races, like people that aren't white are inherently at a disadvantage just because of the way society is today in 2024. So I don't personally have a problem, even if these people have slightly lower test scores or grades or whatever, I don't think it's a problem giving these people a slightly better opportunity.
I also just kind of find it ironic that, you reverse something like affirmative action and, DEI is no longer allowed. It's like a big no-no word, but legacy admissions are still very much so a thing. And there's still such like a big pay-to-play system at hand.
Like, when I think about this, I think about, like, do you know the memes about the leather? Where, like, some people has a longer leather, some people has a shorter leather because they have a different footing, like, to begin with. So at the end of the day, they all are in the same height. But some people will need a longer leather because they're shorter inherently. And I think if you get rid of the DEI, then that longer leather will become the same. And then some people won't be able to see over the wall.
I think to eliminate DEI in the conversation to begin with is an inherent denial that there is social inequality, that like inherent identity barriers that might come from a legacy of systemic discrimination. And I think that makes education overall less accessible, less equitable. I don't think DEI is ever as simple as, oh, well, you know, they got in because they're POC or they got in because they're LGBTQ. It's never as simple as I think a lot of DEI opposition claims it to be.
Right. I think it's all about the context, which is why I like the way the U.S. admissions process works and how they do kind of look at your personal story. I think obviously there's going to be a huge gap in people's extracurriculars grades because of their circumstances. So it makes no sense to like deny that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that type of diversity is because of all these like social structures that are in place to kind of limit those opportunities for people from those types of backgrounds. You need to do something.
All right, let's have the disagreeer step forward.
So I didn't grow up in the US. I don't have a ton of context on racial inequalities per se, which is why I did not feel any sense of disappointment when the decision, like they had the decision out. But help me understand what exactly, like what specifically are the disadvantages that you can like apply to an entire race of people? Like what specifically can you say is a disadvantage that white people, Asians, or anyone else does not face, but specifically everyone else does face that we are accounting for here?
Well,
And just to complete, like on the side of diversity, this time they did not have DEI and the classes are still pretty diverse. So what was DEI doing there? I genuinely want to understand that.
To understand why DEI is necessary in the US specifically takes an understanding of how America was built, and that is off the blood, sweat, and tears of slave labor. When an entire race of people is at a legacy, a generational setback, that even when they were, in law considered at equal footing, were denied opportunities to move upward on the economic ladder, socially, economically, like there's every barrier. Of course, in 2024, you're still going to see a legacy of that effect. In Cornell, for example, the number of Black student admissions dropped half. You have students from like the National Society of Black Engineers saying that recruitment numbers are dwindling at rates that they've never seen before.
Every argument that I'm hearing kind of revolves around not having opportunities, not having money, not having, the resources to pay for a bunch of different things.
It's
and
not just not having, it's denied. Even when you want to get it, it's denied.
It was denied.
There are still, I think, some instances.
What is denied?
When I say that opportunities were denied, I mean like I'm pointing specific to redlining, for example. There was a time when Black families were denied home loans, and being able to afford a home and start paying off a mortgage is how you establish a baseline of generational wealth. So when an entire race of people are denied that opportunity, that's a substantial setback.
But it again came back to wealth. So why is just wealth not what we are going after? Like colleges should account for people who have less resources, and they should be smart enough to understand that, okay, if someone has less resources, then they had lesser opportunities, and we should, create less barriers for them to enter a good university because they had less opportunities. So what is the non-wealth aspect of it, which is why we are not going after financial structures, but instead we are going after race?
If you're in a minority and you know that you're going to a minority place, like you're less likely to apply because you feel like, oh, like they are not welcoming me. Like without the DEI, if I am a Black student, I will feel like these colleges are white privileged people. If I go there, I wouldn't succeed, or I won't feel a sense of belonging. So like, I feel like DEI really creates this sense of like, oh, I want you here, I'm welcoming you. Like,
I think part of the reason why I was kind of hesitant is because I do think that, like we mentioned, DEI is an imperfect proxy of the systemic issues in America, and I think that just trying to solve it with just, because you're a race is going to solve all the issues. I think one of the benefits of this system is that it's starting to show us, like all the universities in particular are starting to point a spotlight at fixing some of the deeper issues. An example of this would be like outreach and getting to students when they're 9th grade, not when they're about to apply to college, and so that students actually have a chance to understand what goes into these college processes, the admissions early. And so I think that in particular, that is one benefit, is that it started to force colleges to approach it from a different angle, which is a little bit more deeper rooted. I do think that social class is a better proxy of this type of systemic issue. Like again, what is your school resources like? Where are the type of things that are given to you from a young age? I think that's why.
how about representation? I think it also matters, right? If you see more Black students there, like you're more likely to apply there. So that also is a factor. I guess it's not just wealth, that's what I'm trying to say. It's like you can't just have a system where you only take into account social class and wealth, because race does not just equal to social class and wealth.
I also want to, I guess as a final thought, acknowledge that this conversation is going to be largely imperfect because we don't have, all of these different identities, especially those who are most affected by DEI policies.
Yeah.
Black communities, Latino communities, Indigenous communities, the LGBTQ communities, etc.
Ivy League students are elitists.
I don't think Ivy League students are elitist. That's like too blanket of a statement to make. Are they more elitist to some extent than people going to other schools? Yes, I think that there's a chance of that happening because obviously, as we've discussed, Ivy League schools are amazing signals and they are great credentials to have on your resume. There's a fair amount of people who probably pick Ivy League schools over other schools because of the prestige and the signaling it provides, and not really the kind of education it provides. Because of that, I think at the end you probably tend to get slightly more elitist people on the whole.
Yeah, I think one of the questions to think about is like, what does elitist mean in particular? Like, again, going back to that management consulting example earlier, I didn't know about this until I even went to Yale in particular. And so do you consider that an elitist culture? I mean, I think personally, yes, because again, like, there's obviously, MBB, they take, people from many different universities, but there's definitely a majority will come from a place like Yale and Ivy Leagues and so forth. Yeah. And so for me, that was a big culture shock because I didn't know this kind of whole subculture existed. Yeah. And so I think that in that sense, I would agree.
Yeah.
No, like as soon as you brought that up, I'm like, you know what, yeah. I think it's harder to be anti-elitist than it is to be elitist in a lot of these spaces, just because I think it's such an incubator. Going to an Ivy League is inherently a means of class reproduction or an incubator for reaching elite or like a higher socioeconomic class. And I think, that's exactly what the signaler is for. So, when you're in a group, a large university of people who generally are in this direction, it's really hard to not fall into prestige chasing or I have to do X, Y, and Z or not feeling like you're less than because maybe the company you're going for is lower or not one of the big four or whatever it might be.
I was thinking about the question you asked is like, what is elitist? Yeah. And I think it's less about where you end up, it's more about why you ended up there. Because if you ended up at a company or something like that, purely because of the name and purely because of the signaling it provides and because you wanted to be in this kind of a secluded group for some reason, then I think it is perhaps elitist to some extent. But not if you're there, if you're genuinely passionate about, if you're genuinely passionate about making decks and being in consulting for some reason, then yeah, absolutely go for it. But if you're there because it's very selective and it's cool to be there, then I think that's wrong.
You don't think it's right?
I was just saying that it is not right to choose a company to work for because you think it is so selective and you get to be part of this really, highly selected group for some reason.
Exclusivity as kind of what you're
you should choose an Ivy League. Or for example, you should choose a Cornell because they have a really good computer science program. Not because it's Cornell, so you have the Cornell name with you.
I do think most people apply to Ivy Leagues because they do recognize there is some brand recognition and there is some value and emphasis that comes from that. And so going back to the original prompt of Ivy League students are elitist, I wonder if elitism just connotes you care about the brand in some sense, because if you don't care about the brand, you can't really be elitist. Or?
That's also kind of what I'm sniffing around right now too is, do we think elitism is necessarily a good thing, a bad thing? Especially when you live in a society that is highly competitive and, if you want to make a living for yourself or if you want to run for material success, then what signaler is going to give you the best competitive advantage? And in that sense, elitism isn't necessarily bad, but it can be.
But I think that is just the pursuit of excellence. It's not really a pursuit of elitism.
All right. Can we have the disagree step forward?
The definition of elitism is the brand name, right? I come from an international background. Like I went to Cornell and Columbia, and a lot of my friends don't even know what they are. They just know Harvard and MIT. Like to the rest of the world, the best university in the U.S. is Harvard, MIT, and Stanford. Like honestly, the rest of the Ivy, I'm really sorry, but they really don't know. So like, is it really that elitist? When you look at it globally, like sure, in the U.S. it's very elite, but like globally, really?
I also think like a lot of people go to non-Ivy League school and are extremely proud of where they go to. Or in fact, some people being just, if someone is a first generation college student, just proud that they're going to get a university degree. So there's definitely more elitists at an Ivy League school than than state schools and a lot of other universities. But I don't know if the majority of the students are elitists. You could be proud that you go to any school, like any school you go to, you could be proud that you go there. So that's why I disagreed with the prompt overall.
I think these schools used to be very elitist, but now that, like Harvard used to just be men, like white men for the most part. But now that we're getting more diverse people in like ethnicity, income, like all these different things, gender, I think they're not elitist now. And I think now that you can sort of learn anything on the internet, I think they're losing a little bit of that brand name as well.
I think my perspective of Ivy League colleges before attending one was probably more cynical, that like, oh, people are here for like elitist reasons. They're here kind of just going through the motions because they think that going to this school makes them appear cooler to other people or whatever. But I think once you actually step on campus, at least for me, that vibe like completely goes away. I think everyone is very like driven, but also I feel like very humble. Like I never had really experiences where people were trying to put each other down. And I think the only time I felt like elite was when I was away from college, coming home, or like when someone asked, where do you go to school? And they're like, oh, wow. But I feel like,
I agree with that.
yeah, I feel like actually attending one of these institutions made me realize that they aren't as elitist as I would have thought.
A college degree isn't relevant anymore.
I just think with the rise of education, or with the rise of online education and like self-learning, there is a big gap growing right now in terms of just like people's like economic success. And I feel like colleges aren't preparing people for that, for I guess for the internet really. I feel like colleges are just outdated now. I think back then, if you went through college, you kind of were guaranteed a certain like level of like, I guess, comfort, like economically, where I feel like now that's just not the case anymore, because I think so many people go to college without much intention to it either, and then they graduate college and they don't really know what to do because they're trying to apply to these jobs and it's really tough. I was very caught up in like college admissions in high school, and when I got into Brown, I'm from a place where like not many people go to Ivy League schools, so there was just no way me at 18 years old was going to pass up on that, I think. But I think once I got to college, I kind of was given a taste of what this would entail, and I just realized it wasn't for me. I didn't like the corporate world at all. I think I was kind of sick of just like the bullshit, because college applications was a lot of like bullshit when it came to essays and stuff, and then I felt like once I got to college, I thought that would end, but it just kind of kept going with like job applications, internships, everything in the college world, like leadership positions in clubs and stuff. And I'm like, I'm kind of done with this. I didn't want to do it anymore. I'm like, who am I doing this for? And it wasn't me. And that's ultimately why I dropped out. I think I didn't necessarily know what I was getting into.
Can we have the disagree a step forward?
You can learn so much online, or just through ways that are not university. You can develop extensive skill sets. But for a majority of jobs, good paying jobs that someone might want, a requirement is a 4-year bachelor degree. And in fact, I think now that it's going beyond that to having a master's degree or a degree, not even a bachelor's degree. So now I think that it is so important to try to get that bachelor's degree for so many jobs.
To be as fair as possible, I think your ability to have a judgment or an opinion on the validity of a college degree is indicative of privilege. I know that for a lot of people that I know and a lot of first and second generation families, a college degree is a means to lay a foundation in a country you have no roots in. Yeah. I know that employment is substantially more difficult for someone who might have their nursing or doctorate degree from the Philippines rather than somewhere in the US. The skill set is very much so the same. The life skills are the same, but because they lack that line, the US or a college degree here, it makes life a lot more difficult.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that one. So I think the things that colleges are great at doing is twofold. One is that it provides good verification for skills where you really need some kind of education. Like, would I want my doctor or my lawyer to be a dropout? I don't think so. I would want them to have gotten their education, because to be frank, you can't learn surgery online.
Right.
At least not yet. Not yet. The reason smart people from around the world are moving to the US is because they are attracted to good colleges, and they move because of these colleges. The part that I disagree with a little bit is that jobs requiring degrees. I think they require degrees, but that's because society is going after a lagging indicator. Like for 500 years back, people thought that the earth was flat, and everyone wholeheartedly agreed on it, and the church burnt astronomers for saying the opposite. So just because everyone wants a 4-year degree is not a valid reason to say that it's relevant. Is it the practical decision to do? Yes. But at the same time, I feel where I see the trends going, I believe that less and less employers will start having a 4-year bachelor degree as a requirement.
I think the reason why the 4-year bachelor degree as a requirement is important is because it actually shows employer that you are committed to something, that you're committed enough to do 4 years. If I'm a dropout, then that shows to people that if you don't you don't have the persistence or the will to finish a college degree. And I guess that's why a lot of people still value this education a lot.
Yeah, I think it's a qualifier. You can show up to work on time and put in the work, and you already did that for 4 years.
Yeah, exactly.
I think if no one had degrees, it'd be really hard to tell all these people apart and differentiate applicants. I think now we're moving towards work experience. Now you need a degree plus work experience as a graduate, which is pretty impossible to have unless you have some sort of crazy drive or got these opportunities. But I think we're moving towards not only the degree, but your own, drive and experience on top of that.
I don't think it's about necessarily also learning everything that you learned. It's about what you guys said, putting in the 4 years. I had a professor, a Calc 3 professor, and he goes, in 10 years, you guys probably are not going to remember Calc 3, but you'll take away studying skills, doing homework, preparing on time. And if I'm doing that across 6 classes for my dual degree, 1 degree at Columbia, 1 degree at the Jewish Theological Seminary, I'm putting so much work, and that can show employers that I'm dedicated and that I did this for 4 years, as opposed to someone who didn't take up a 4-year bachelor degree education.
But if 98% of people did that, then is it really a differentiator?
Is it 98%? Not
for
98%.
For an average job that people apply to, I would guess that at least, let's say 95% have a college degree, the kind of jobs that you would apply for after graduating.
Yeah, that's why.
But at least that gives a baseline, right?
People who didn't graduate for college are not applying to those jobs because they can't get those jobs.
Yeah, that's a big.
You need college. I think you need a degree. As you said, 98% of the people that have those jobs have college degrees because they were able to apply to those jobs, unlike the people who didn't meet that requirement. That 2% might be existential factors, but 98% have a college degree. They met that requirement.
From an HR kind of perspective too, I think it's still very much so the norm in like recruiters' minds, where it's like, you know, you're scanning resumes, applicants, the first thing you're looking for, like, okay, like boom, college, fine, next one. And if they don't kind of have like the base, like 3 things that you're looking for, a college degree being one of them, then it's like, all right, next applicant. And until that norm shifts away from this kind of like model that we've taken on for such a long time, which I don't anticipate will be anytime soon, so long as that remains true, I think a college degree is necessary and relevant.
For me, because of like the bubble I kind of exist in, I've always felt like a college degree isn't necessary, just because most of my friends and people I work with don't go to college. And when I hire people for like specific things like video editing or things like that, I don't look at like traditional educational experience, obviously, because this is, I guess, like a field that like college doesn't prepare you for. I just look at people's portfolios. But I think you guys all brought up great points where I realized, okay, there's also like every other job. I think the prompt was like a pretty blanket statement, but I definitely think it's probably necessary for like the majority of jobs that people are trying to get.
Yeah, well, I agree with you in that. Like, if you don't want a job that you need college for, then you don't need to go to college. Or some people, let's say, they want to not go to college and they want to join the military. That's amazing. Or if they want to, as you said, do editing, they don't need college for that. If they know what they want to do and they don't need college for, that's great. But if someone wants a job and the requirement is college, I don't know how they're going to get that job without satisfying that requirement.
For sure.
I find it really interesting that all of us are talking about college from the perspective of a vocational or professional perspective, but I'm going to add a little bit of a different flavor. I think that there's also the personal growth aspect as well, which we haven't really talked about. I'll give you an example. So I grew up in a hometown that was like very kind of rural and suburban, and so a lot of my friends, and myself included, went to places that were very far away from our original hometown with people who are our age, you know, surrounded by people from very different backgrounds, different parts of the state. And I think that's a really great place to like build like personal growth in terms of like learning how to deal with academics and like learning how to deal with relationships. And like, you know, I think there's a lot of other stuff that goes on in college, like drugs and, you know, all that stuff that's like your first exposure in particular. And so for me, like, it would have been a lot harder to find that like social and network group like back in my hometown, because I've noticed after graduating, for example, like people kind of just do their own jobs and do their own thing. So I'm a little bit curious, Jacob, if you could tell me more about like that side of like when you dropped out of college, like how did you do all that personal growth stuff?
Like finding a sense of like community and like footing. That
Yeah,
type of thing.
and just like dealing with like life stuff, you know, just like.
I dropped out of Brown after 2.5 years, and I actually really like, particularly like the first year, I think I learned a lot of life skills. It was my first time also traveling like really far away from home and living by myself, which I think broadened my view of like what is possible. I think having that year specifically, it was super helpful for me, where now that I do like live on my own, I think I do have a lot of like those kinds of skills that you figure out in college. But I also think like my community now and like the people that I work with now, the people that I'm friends with now who do similar things to me, I feel like in a lot of ways it's similar to having college friends. Like we talk about what we're working on, we kind of push each other. I'll call my friends and we'll like just be on a call like editing together, similar to how people study in groups. Like I feel like I live with a lot of people who are like my age too, like 21, 22. So it doesn't feel too different from a college experience that I feel like I kind of shaped myself, I guess.
I also think you have a special circumstance that most people that dropped out, or most people, let's say, that are not going to graduate college don't have.
Right.
You have this filming, making YouTube videos, and you have this whole community. A lot of people that don't go to college don't have what you have, and I think you're very lucky for having that. But again, I think that brings back to the point that for most people, they need that college degree. And it gives them like a baseline. It helps them get jobs. I think you just have a very special situation.
Right, I think you're right.
Yeah.
The admission process is fair and equitable.
So I think when I hear about this prompt, I'm comparing it to other, I'm thinking about it in terms of other international systems of education, in the sense that like, I think about like the testing, right, where it's just solely a test. And I think that is a really reductive way to capture someone's personality in particular. And so the way I think of this is not it's completely fair or completely equitable, but I think it's definitely more fair than that system in particular. I think in particular, like for me as an example, when I was going through the education process, so I came from a small town, and so like I did not go to like Phillips Exeter or Andover, these really prestigious schools that had tons of resources, and then these kids like I help a lot of students from those backgrounds who are winning national, international level awards in particular, and they have these entire systems set up to support them, from like test prep tutors to like really nationally acclaimed coaches. I didn't have any of that growing up. And one thing I know the admissions office does here is that they actually look at the background from which you come from, unlike a test score, right? So if you come from a less disadvantaged background, or you come from like a less represented part of a state like upstate New York, then you get, they kind of take that into account, or you come from a very difficult background with a lot of adversity, which is measured in the essays. I think that in particular gives a much more fair representation than like a test score.
I agree with that. Like from an international lens, I didn't do AP, I didn't do IB, I didn't do any world-renowned like testing. Like I got in without testing. So it's like I think it's so much fairer than the system in Hong Kong. Like in Hong Kong, everything is test, everything is score. So like you don't see that person as a whole. You don't see like what they do outside of school. Like how are they as a person when they're not like being tested? Like do they like contribute to society and everything? Like I think the American administration system like do a lot, like really good job in that.
No, I totally agree. I think it's a fair and equitable process. I don't think colleges are doing anything wrong. I still stand on that point that it's maybe not the best process because you can game it, but I don't think the colleges are really going out of their way to do anything obscenely unfair to people in some way. Also, like they're continuously making improvements. Like the Supreme Court passed a judgment on the DEI stuff. The California decided to ban legacy admissions at all universities.
That's great.
And I think these things make it a little bit more equitable. So I do think it's a very fair process, and I don't think colleges are going out of their way to make it unfair for anyone. I just feel like it can be gamed, and there are ways to like do that. So maybe colleges need to get ahead of that and maybe change their process a little bit to make sure that people are not able to hack their way into the system. I think the college system to some extent tries to find people who are ambitious and who are, like who have a good personality, who talk about a bunch of things, and that is reflected through your essays. And when people start writing those essays, I saw a bunch of blogs online which talk about, oh, you need to talk about a struggle. What if I didn't have like any major struggle, like so why do I need to talk about a struggle that is hard in your definition for me to get in? And apparently, like if you do that, then you can get in. There are like, oh, apply to these prizes and like, apply to these grants and do these particular competitions because this competition has a higher correlation with getting into XYZ college. And as soon as there's these patterns that emerge, I think people start going after those patterns, and colleges need to just do a better job of making sure that they're not just, pattern matching when they're taking in students.
MIT literally has a website called What We Look For, and they literally write down the 5 traits, and they correlate exactly with the essays. For example, one of them is like the ability to prioritize balance. That is right on the website. It's completely free for anyone to see. Another example, Yale cares about intellectual curiosity. That is right on the website, and then you can just look at it right there. And so I think one of the things that we care a lot about is trying to equalize that gap in particular. And so as much as there's many things that are unfair about the education system in America, I can't think of a better alternative that is able to accommodate for that. Like if the choice is between like not looking at these traits like grit, perseverance, or even like something at all versus just complete blanket out like a test, I would rather have like a flawed system that at least tries to tackle it, because that can always be improved.
All right, can the disagree step forward?
An unfair aspect about it that some people could agree with me on is early decision, that that people can apply early, have a much higher chance in getting in because they agree to go and probably pay full price, whereas people who are less fortunate can't necessarily apply early decision and for sure go, which I think is an aspect that can definitely make college admissions unfair. Not everyone has that ability to do ED.
So long as there is a way to game the system, it's going to be unfair. And like you said too, like these prestigious boarding schools like Exeter, Andover, St. Paul, they have like not only these like very, very small class sizes, but their counselors have the social capital to Ivy League admissions officers to individually advocate for students. A random public school in Las Vegas wouldn't have that.
I think that that's going to be inherent in any system. I can't think of a system that cannot be gamed.
It's such a game, but then I do feel like the internet does help equalize it a bit.
But even on top of that, I think people want you to spend money to get even more information.
Right.
I think they put free information out there to attract you, but there's still this like monetary barrier to getting extra information.
Also, like if someone does have the money to take these advantages to help them, I don't blame them for that. But it definitely is unfair to people that don't have money to help them not game the system, but help them
Just
form.
optimize,
Help them best optimize and form their resume and essays. If you have the money, for sure, that's great. Take advantage of those opportunities that you have to help you get in. But it is definitely unfair to people that cannot do that.
It takes more courage to quit than to finish.
I think that if you're dropping out of an Ivy League school, there's a special reason why you dropped out of the Ivy League school, because they offer so many opportunities to help you succeed academically, that it is, once you're in the school, I think that it is very feasible to stay in the school and graduate, and that everyone who drops out or transfers, they're doing that for a reason that couldn't be solved by staying at the school.
Yeah, personally for me, dropping out was the hardest thing I'd ever done in my life. I think it was, the first time I really made a decision for myself that I couldn't look to other people for guidance because no one really had the full picture of my situation. And I think that decision gave me just so much, confidence in myself. It was my first time really navigating my life, with intention and direction, where finishing would have been a lot easier for me to kind of just continue to go through that path. But for me, I was very much in college, drifting like a leaf, just kind of going through the motions. So I think to finally take a step back and walk away from all that after all the time I invested was a super difficult thing.
I don't know if people know this, but at Harvard, you can always go back. So though I technically dropped out, I still feel like I haven't let returning to school as an option go. And it's been hard for me to talk about just because I don't just feel very lost. Am I doing the right thing? Should I go back to school?
So what's the difference then between dropping out and taking an extended gap year?
I think it's just a forever extended leave of absence.
Definitely.
It depends on school, and you do lose financial aid after a few years.
How many years?
6 years, I believe.
Yeah, for me, it's the same situation. I think I have 3 years until I would have to reapply. But then also all of my loans are in repayments and things like that too right now.
I dropped out because of health reasons and not because I'm going to pursue another more lucrative venture. So I think it really takes a lot of courage because I don't have anything down the line. It's just me, it's just staying at home and doing nothing. That's the alternative from college. And I think the fact that I put my health first instead of this brand name institution, it takes a lot of courage.
And you did the right thing.
Yeah.
I feel as international, one of my concerns was immigration, which becomes tremendously harder if you don't graduate from college. That is something I had to get past a little bit. But at the end of the day, I think I just love what I do so much. I love building software. I love working with technology. I really love building a startup. And there's a bunch of role models that you can look up to, and you can see that, okay, these people were incredibly passionate, they were driven, and they took a very calculated risk about their lives, and that paid out. So at the end of the day, I think as long as you're very real with yourself and you're true to yourself and you're true about your potential, sometimes people can be a little bit deluded about the reasons they're dropping out for. So as long as you're honest to yourself about that, I think it's a risk worth taking, even if it takes a bunch of courage to do that. The more important thing is that it is 4 years of your really peak life when you have the highest amount of energy, which is why I think it is a great time to be building things, to be thinking about things and taking risks that you cannot take later in life because you have to make more calculated decisions about other people who are dependent on you.
Yeah, I think the best thing you can do is take a step back and ask yourself, who am I doing this for? I think for me at Brown, it was a really nice experience, but it felt like I was wearing someone else's shoes almost. And that's kind of what made me realize okay, I need to follow my, the thing that excites me, the thing that makes me get out of bed every day, because I think having that kind of passion for something is the most valuable thing in the world and you don't want to let it die. Bye guys.
Bye.
Nice meeting you guys.